Hey, I thought I'd make a video. A lot of people ask me what app I use to make drawings on my phone, and while that's not really the most important thing about the drawings for me, I do like this app in the end. So just give a very quick demo that doesn't really teach anything, but just shows you the app. So the app is Adobe Sketch. I'll just open it up. Adobe Photoshop Sketch, and you'll see when I go in, you get project folders that you can put. I don't know if there's actually a maximum amount, but you can put different kind of groupings of things you're working on together into these projects. I'll just go into this one, and you'll see in each project there's sort of basically pages, sort of like the pages of a sketchbook. This is the last one I did here, but I'll just open up a brand new page, and you can see here that everyone starts with one layer, and you can obviously add more layers as you go. I usually actually just use one layer, and so usually one of the first things I do is up here you can turn off the display of what layers you're using, because I know each time I'm only going to use that one layer. I'll also just demonstrate right away that this is sort of the your 100% view of your paper or your canvas, but you can scale it just using the normal pinch and zoom, so you can get the kind of a full view, or you can zoom in. You can't tell I'm zooming in yet because there's nothing there. Also, obviously on this side, you're seeing the current tool set that I have available. If you get this app, if you are interested, this may not be the first tool set or the order you get. This is sort of the last set of tools that I would have used that's come in here. And at any point, actually, if you hold on to one of these, you actually get access to all the tools that are available. I generally actually just like the default ones, but I occasionally will switch out here and there. You also see up here, this is my library, and it basically, if you use the Adobe Creative Cloud stuff, you can make your own brushes and use the brushes between different apps. But again, I generally just use their built-in ones, brushes, pencils, etc., because they're quite good. So to start off, what I normally do is I want to fill this with some sort of color, texture, something. I do different brushes for that each time. Occasionally this bottom one here is that's kind of a wide watercolor brush, so occasionally I'll use that. And maybe I'll demonstrate something first about these brushes. When you click it, obviously it's been selected, but if I click it again, I actually get the properties for that brush. So from the top here, this is the size of the brush. You can just sort of scale that, and that shows you dynamically how big that brush is. All of them have maximums and minimums. For the watercolor, when I started, I like this big, huge 350 size. In the middle here, it's what they call flow, which is in essence kind of the opacity, although there are other settings for that, which I'll show you soon. But basically, this is how much of that brush's effect you're putting down at any one time. And then down here at the bottom, this is color. So if I tap on that, I get a normal sort of color wheel that I can move through the colors. And down here, I can use this slider to go through and change the kind of brightness of that color. So if I'm in the center here, obviously, or almost in the center, to each side I've basically got a grayscale here, but then if I move around, you can see the color changing there. I'm normally in this mode. You'll also see up here, you can do this as RGB sliders, or you can do this, you can get a history. This is the first time just opening it, I don't have history, but normally there would be a history of colors used. There's also interesting things here that I don't normally use, but there's like analogous colors. You can get a monochromatic set based on the current color you've picked. triad, etc., etc. Sort of, if you've done any color theory stuff, these are the kind of things that you would be thinking of. Like I say, normally I pick one color at a time, and therefore I generally just sort of pick in the range here, move the slider here, and that's my initial choice. So let's just pick a color for the background. I don't know, occasionally I like working from a fairly dark color. So you can see now I've got this watercolor brush, quite big, with this. One last thing, down here at the very bottom you'll see a little kind of a set of sliders. If I click that, this actually gives me a few more controls for that brush. The size of it, the flow of it, and the velocity. I won't get into those too much, but each tool or each kind of media type will have this extra level of settings if you want to get into that sort of thing. I can just cancel that out. I can also get rid of this toolbar thing at any point by just tapping up here. So now I've got a pretty uninterrupted view of this, and I can actually start putting in. So for this base layer, I don't know. Honestly, I am, most of what I do, I just sort of follow the kind of marks that I want to make, and when I have interesting kind of shapes or textures, then I go with that. So there's no real there's a method here, but it's sort of as I go along. I am gonna find something that I feel like I want. So occasionally I make this like just a full block of color, but sometimes I'll just go for something. You'll see if I leave this here for a little while. Hard to see maybe actually, but most of these tools are quite smart. And in this case, the watercolor brush actually does bleed into itself. So when you make kind of passes, each pass with the brush, you can actually gradually see that each stroke of the brush is bleeding into the other strokes, much like you'd expect actual watercolor to do. So it's quite well designed, programmed set of tools. The other thing I'll note here with the watercolor is because of that sort of active wet state of the watercolor, there's this little thing down here that the other tools don't have. It's a little fan. If you tap that, that basically dries the current state of your watercolor. So now this is now non-active. This has stopped bleeding into itself, and it would be sort of a static layer from that point on. If I switch brushes here, I'll just start with the two that I use a lot. So this top one is a pencil, essentially. If I go into that, again, we see size. I normally do fairly small, in the 3, sometimes I actually do very small lines, but let's say pick 3.5, and I like the pencil to be quite, like maybe slightly translucent, but mostly opaque, and I don't know, we'll just pick any sort of color choices I make on the fly, so it's not like there's no kind of plan in my mind for what I'm going to do most of the time. So I just pick colors that make sense to me at the time. So first I'll just show you. So this is the sort of 100% view. If I start making lines here, you can see that's the sort of normal pencil line I might make. Occasionally, I'll often just work like this, but occasionally I may zoom in, and you can see that these pencil lines, so this is at, I think that I'm now at, there's full zoom. You can see that these pencil lines, I'm seeing both kind of a watercolor paper texture here, and you can see the fidelity of those pencil lines. And now that I'm zoomed in, my strokes can become quite intentional and small, like this. And then if I zoom back out, you can see that I'm able to get quite a level of detail with those, to the point where, it looks, obviously I wouldn't be able to make quite that level of detail with, I am, as you can tell here, using my finger for all this. That's another question people have had with a few of these. Am I using a stylus? Is this on an iPad? So now this is, obviously it's an iPhone 6 and my finger. So just keep on going here, going through a few tools. The other one I use most of all down here, this is the, what do they call this one? Hold on one sec. They call this one this is thick acrylic is what this brush is called. And you'll see why just in a moment. If I pick a color here, let's do something like that. And I've got here, I'm going to make it as big as it can be. In this case it's 50, and then I like the acrylics to be pretty solid. Sometimes I also pull them down a little bit, but mostly I like them to look like kind of thick acrylic paint when I put it on. And again, you can see as I'm going in here, I'm getting quite authentic looking brush strokes. And I'm also getting brush strokes within the mass of the paint itself, so that if I zoom in here, you can see pretty convincing as kind of a thick layer of acrylic paint. And if I go back into the same area, I'm basically pushing around that paint. So, you know, I can make, if I want to make kind of these circles within the same color, I could do that sort of thing. And then you can also do, you know, if I turn the flow down on this, you can see that when I'm putting, I'll zoom, I am now revealing more of that background layer when I'm making these strokes, and I'm revealing previous strokes more. So if you want to do a kind of watered down acrylic kind of look with this, you can. I'll just go through a few of the other tools just so you know. This is a pen tool. I almost never use that. This one, I forget now. I think this is actually the small watercolor brush. So it achieves similar effects. I think this is a small watercolor. I should probably check. Hold on. Unless that's marker brush. That could be marker brush. So maybe we'll just run through this list here. Just graphite pencil, ink pen, marker brush, marker chisel, watercolor round brush, which is the one I thought that one was. So essentially that's a smaller, more tapered version of the normal kind of chunky, what they call watercolor flat brush down here. I use the flat brush most of all. Then thick acrylic, which I used, ink brush, which is similar in feeling in terms of the brush feeling to the thick acrylic, but doesn't have the internal texture. As you would expect, it's replicating ink. Soft pastel, which is what it sounds like. Smudge, which I almost never use. Basically, again, if you ever used a smudge stick or something, it's a way of taking other parts and blending them together. The spray is interesting. I use that usually in a very large spray. It's good for approximating kind of things that you want to feel blurry, or definitely when occasionally I've drawn things that are like cloudscapes, and that's perfect for doing that. Then again, the acrylic brush, and then ink marker. Pastel I've used a little bit, although I find it's a little too specific sometimes. I think the pastel, you can see on this end it's got this little chunk, and because these are, you know, it's taking a kind of rendition of a brushstroke and building it up digitally. Whenever there's something too specific about the stroke, you end up seeing it kind of in repetition, and it can stand out to you. And then there's these three are kind of holdovers. They have another product called Adobe Line, which is essentially their vector version of this kind of drawing tool. Like, imagine it's the Illustrator drawing tool complement to this. So I don't know. Let's see. I'll just go back to the drawing tools here. Maybe I'll just do a little bit more drawing. and you can just sort of see where I go with this. I don't really know what I'll do yet, but we'll see. I'll say, like, in terms of how long these, if you've seen any of these, probably the only reason you're watching this video, if you've seen any of the ones I've done, there's some people have wondered, are these extremely quick things? What's the, because it is called sketch, maybe there's a thinking there, and they are somewhat, I don't know, they range for me. Sometimes they really are very quick. I mean, I'll do something that'll take 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that, but I've also done a few of these where it's actually taken me, probably the longest I've taken on any one of them is about around 45-50 minutes, something like that, which is not I tend to do most of my drawings, the ones that I do not on a phone, I do them fairly quickly, but they'll take me anywhere from a few hours to a number of days to complete. But I do work on them generally fairly quickly, mostly because what I seem to enjoy the most are fairly quick, if small, kind of mark making. Like I like making quick gestural notes like this, and especially things that sort of imply, or actually are sort of the motion of these really small gestures I'm doing. There's no, that's just what I happen to like doing. It's just sort of how I've adapted drawing in this sort of sorry, hard to talk and do this at the same time, I find, in this sort of abstract way. I'm obviously thinking about these as I make them, but there's also quite a just sort of a natural process of where they feel right. And once if I've made these marks, sometimes I'll think, oh, I feel like I want, another kind of color of but the same sort of mark to come in between those, and that's just, I don't know. This is what comes to mind, or sort of it's like most things art. I think it's this intuitive and kind of emotional process that everyone goes through, where explaining it is sort of a losing battle most of the time. There can be, I've found in things that I've drawn, there are obviously commonalities. There are recurring modes or types of visuals, or even thematic things that come up, but they're not really, I don't start any of these things with the intention usually to draw something specific. Even the ones, if you've followed along with any of these things, clearly I've drawn some things that are kind of natural scenes, plants, or kind of nature, or I've done a bunch of things that I started calling wind imagined, and those are, I don't set out to say, like, well, I'm going to draw a creosote tree blowing in the wind or something like that. That's just sort of, I start drawing something, and then to me it's like, oh, this is starting to feel like one of these wind drawings, and it just sort of happens to end up looking like a creosote tree blowing in the wind. So I don't know, that stuff just sort of happens. Oh, here comes Molly. Hi, Molly. How you doing? You're very helpful. Yes. Helpful dog. All right. Well, since Molly wants my attention, I think I'll just end this one here. And I'll point out one more thing, actually, and it's something I don't really use but can be somewhat helpful. Up here in the menu, there is a tool for shapes. There's a number of these kind of sliders that have all sorts of shapes. In general, the only one I've really used, this first one here, gives you this sort of, essentially it's kind of like a ruling space. You can fill it, although I will say these don't work as well as some of the other tools, but one of the things, I don't generally like using these, but I'll just show one thing. So now I've got that down, I can sort of draw along the side of that, and if I delete that, you'll see I've actually drawn a perfectly straight line along that side. The other thing I'll note here is that everything I've done here, because obviously it is, I'm working on a computer, I have the facility to undo a lot of things quite easily. There is actually an eraser tool, but what that does is erase down to the very bottom of your current layer, so that I don't really like that. But there is up here an undo functionality, an undo button, or I can also take two fingers and do a swipe to the left, and you'll see that line I just drew is gone. And I can step back. Actually, I haven't counted, but there's quite a few layers of undo that you can go through. And just what I tend to do when I feel like I'm done, this one doesn't feel done to me, but I'll just show you, is there's a bunch of different options for what you can do with these images. So you can copy to your clipboard. I generally choose, I choose share down there, and I just save the image to my camera roll, and then I can do whatever I want with it. But you'll notice there are a few key options here where you can save the actual Photoshop file, the PSD, to, if you have Creative Cloud and you've signed in through that, you can save it to your Creative Cloud. I forget what they call it, but basically your files in Creative Cloud. Or also, quite kind of amazingly, if you're by your computer and you happen to, and it's turned on and you have Creative Cloud, you can send to Photoshop or send to Illustrator, and this file with its layers, not editable with brushes and everything, but its component layers will actually just open in Photoshop or Illustrator, and then you can choose to do more things with it from that point on your desktop computer. But so far I haven't done that. I've tested the opening of it, but I haven't done anything with the files. Alright, so that's it for now. I will maybe do more of these if anyone's interested, but if not, thanks.